hello, and a very warm welcome. You have found your way to Sleep Tales, a quiet place for you to rest your mind. Find a comfortable position now, perhaps lying down in your bed, and allow your body to feel heavy and relaxed. Let your eyes close gently. There is nothing else you need to do and nowhere else you need to be. Just listen to the sound of my voice. Tonight's story is about a quiet valley in autumn, a time of golden light and long shadows. It is a story about finding a place to be still. Let the day melt away as we travel to the small village of Oakhaven. The Last Light of Oakhaven, Chapter 1, The Weight of Stillness. The journey had been long. For hours, Anna had watched the world change through the windows of her car. The city, with its tall gray buildings and its endless noise, had slowly fallen away behind her. The wide, busy highways became smaller roads, winding and quiet. Then those roads became even smaller, turning into narrow lanes that twisted and climbed through hills. The trees grew thicker here, their leaves a brilliant mix of yellow, orange, and deep red. The sun was low in the sky, and its light slanted through the branches, painting moving patterns on the road ahead. She had been driving for most of the day, and a deep weariness had settled into her bones. It was more than the tiredness from the drive. It was a weariness that had been with her for months, maybe years. It lived in her shoulders, a constant, heavy weight. It lived in her mind, a low hum of anxiety that never quite went away. Her life in the city felt like a story someone else had written for her. The apartment was small and expensive. The job was demanding and hollow, a series of tasks and deadlines that left her feeling empty at the end of each day. She felt disconnected, as if she were watching her own life from a great distance. The car climbed one last hill, and then the valley opened up before her. It was a breathtaking sight. The mountains on either side were covered in dark green pine trees and patches of fiery autumn color. Down below, the valley floor was a patchwork of golden fields and dark woods. A small cluster of stone houses with thin trails of smoke rising from their chimneys was nestled near the center. That had to be Oakhaven. It looked smaller than she had imagined, a tiny forgotten place held in the cup of the mountains. She followed the narrow road as it descended into the valley. The air grew cooler. She could smell the scent of damp earth. She passed a simple wooden sign with the name of the village carved into it. The letters were old and worn by the weather. The car bumped along a road made of packed dirt and stones. She saw a few people, an old woman sweeping her porch, 2 children chasing a dog, but they barely glanced at her as she drove past. She felt like a ghost. The directions her great-uncle's lawyer had sent were simple. The cottage was at the very edge of the village, the last house on a path that led towards the forest. She found it easily. It was small, made of dark, weathered stone, with a roof of heavy slate tiles. A low stone wall, crumbling in places, enclosed a small, overgrown garden. It looked sad and lonely, as if it had been waiting for a very long time. She pulled the car onto a patch of grass beside the wall and turned off the engine. The sudden silence was immense. It was not just quiet, it was a profound and total stillness that pressed in on her from all sides. In the city, there was always a sound, the distant wail of a siren, the hum of traffic, the noise from other apartments. Here, there was nothing but the vast, empty space of the valley. The silence felt heavy, almost like a physical presence. It made the ringing in her ears, a faint sound she never noticed in the city, seem loud. She sat in the car for a long moment, just listening to the quiet, feeling its weight. Finally, she opened the car door and stepped out. The air was crisp and cool against her skin. It smelled clean, a mixture of pine needles, wet leaves, and cold stone. She walked to the small wooden gate in the stone wall. It creaked loudly when she pushed it open. The path to the front door was paved with flat stones, many of them tilted and covered in a thin layer of green moss. Weeds grew in the cracks between them. The front door was painted a dark green, the paint peeling and faded. A large iron key was in the lock. The lawyer had told her it would be. She put her hand on the cold metal key and turned it. The lock was stiff and protested with a loud grinding sound, but it finally gave way. The door swung inward with a low groan. The air that wafted out from inside was stale and cold, the smell of a place that had been closed up for years. It smelled of dust, old wood, and something else, a faint, dry scent like old paper. She stood on the threshold, peering into the gloom. The plan was simple, she reminded herself. She would stay for the autumn. She would air the place out, make a few basic repairs, give it a coat of paint, just enough to make it presentable. Then she would put it on the market, sell it, and take the money back to the city. Maybe it would be enough to make a change, to find a different job, a different life. It was a practical plan. She was not here for a new beginning. She was here for a transaction, a way to close a chapter on a part of her family she barely knew. Her great-uncle had been a name in a Christmas card, a distant relative she had met only once as a small child. Now he was gone, and he had left her this small, forgotten cottage. She took a deep breath of the fresh valley air and stepped inside, leaving the door open behind her to let in the light. But the afternoon was fading fast. The sun had dipped lower, and the light that entered the cottage was a soft, golden glow. It was not enough to see clearly. She walked slowly through the main room. It was a combination of a living area and a kitchen. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth filled with old gray ashes. A simple wooden table and 2 chairs stood in the center of the room. A small sofa and an armchair were covered in white dust cloths, their shapes like sleeping animals in the dim light. In the kitchen area, a stone sink was set against the back wall, with a single cold water tap above it. A small old stove stood next to it. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust. She felt a sense of unease. The cottage felt so empty, so full of the past. It was not her past. It was someone else's. She felt like an intruder, a trespasser in another person's memories. The weariness she had felt in the car returned, heavier now. The task of cleaning this place, of bringing it back to life, felt enormous. For a moment, she thought about getting back in her car and driving away, leaving the key in the door and forgetting this place ever existed. But where would she go? Back to the city, back to the hollow life she was so desperate to escape. No, she had come this far. She would see it through. Instead of starting the impossible task of cleaning, she decided to walk. She needed to feel the air, to stretch her legs, to remind herself that there was a world outside these dusty stone walls. She stepped back out of the cottage, closing the door but not locking it, and walked past her car to the end of the lane. Here, a well-worn path began. It led away from the village, running along the edge of a vast open field. The field was a sea of tall, dry grass that glowed a brilliant gold in the last light of the sun. The forest looked mysterious and a little intimidating, its shadows deep and black. She began to walk along the path, her feet crunching on fallen leaves and twigs. The air was getting colder as the sun sank closer to the jagged peaks of the western mountains. The light was magical. It was a thick, honey-colored light that made everything it touched seem special and beautiful. It lit up the golden field, the dark bark of the trees, and the small, floating seeds that drifted on the air. The long shadows stretched across the path in front of her. The world seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for the night. Walking felt good. The simple, repetitive motion of her legs was calming. Her mind, which was usually a whirlwind of thoughts and worries, began to quiet down. She focused on the world around her. the sound of her footsteps, the feel of the cool air on her face, the smell of the autumn earth. She walked for a long time, following the curve of the field. The village of Oakhaven was behind her now, hidden by a stand of trees. She felt completely alone, but it was not a frightening loneliness. And then she saw him. He was far in the distance, walking along the same path, but coming from the opposite direction. At first, he was just a dark shape against the golden light. As he came closer, she could see more details. He was tall and moved with an easy, unhurried grace. He was wearing dark, simple clothes. He was too far away to see his face clearly, but she could see that his hair was the color of dark honey, and the setting sun caught it, making it glow. He was not looking at her. He seemed to belong here, as much a part of the landscape as the trees and the field. He walked with a purpose, but without any sense of rush. Anna found herself stopping, standing still on the path to watch him. There was something about the image that struck her deeply. The man, walking alone, bathed in the beautiful, fading light of the autumn afternoon. He represented a kind of peace, a sense of quiet certainty that she felt she had lost a long time ago. He was a perfect picture of harmony with his surroundings. He did not seem to be fighting against the world or rushing through it. He was simply in it. The image burned itself into her mind. As he drew a little closer, she felt a sudden shyness. She was an outsider here, a stranger from the city in her clean, practical jacket. She felt clumsy and out of place. She turned and began to walk back the way she came, towards the cottage. We did not want to meet him, not yet. She did not want to break the spell of the perfect image. She just wanted to hold it in her mind. She walked quickly, not looking back. By the time she reached her great-uncle's cottage, the sun had disappeared behind the mountains, and the valley was sinking into a deep blue twilight. The magic light was gone. She went inside, found an old oil lamp on the dusty mantelpiece, and after several attempts, managed to light it. The small flame cast a warm, flickering glow around the room, pushing back the shadows. That night, she did not unpack. She brought a blanket in from her car, wrapped it tightly around herself on the dusty sofa, and fell into a deep, exhausted sleep. The image of the man in the golden light, her last thought. The next few days passed in a slow, quiet haze. Anna woke up each morning to the profound silence of the valley. The quiet was still a new and strange thing. At first, it had felt heavy and oppressive. Now she was beginning to get used to it. She was starting to hear the small sounds within the silence, the call of a bird high on the mountain, the rustle of a mouse in the cottage walls, the gentle whisper of the wind through the pine trees. These sounds were different from the noises of the city. They were natural and calming, part of the rhythm of the place. Her first task was to make the cottage livable. She began to clean. It was a slow and methodical process. She started in the main room, taking the white cloths off the furniture. The sofa and armchair were old but sturdy, made of dark wood and covered in a faded floral fabric. She beat the dust out of the cushions outside, watching the gray clouds puff into the air and drift away on the breeze. She swept the stone floors, the broom making a satisfying scratching sound. A thick layer of gray dust and dirt came up, along with dried leaves and the fragile skeletons of old insects. She found a bucket and a cloth and began to wash the floors, the windows, the walls. Her muscles, unused to this kind of work, ached at the end of the day. But it was a good kind of ache. It was the ache of accomplishment. As she worked, her mind was quiet. She was not thinking about her old job or the pressures of the city. She was focused on the simple, immediate task in front of her, wiping away the years of neglect, one small section at a time. As she cleaned, she began to discover the life of her great-uncle. He had been a man of simple tastes. In the kitchen, the cupboards held a few plain white dishes, a set of heavy, well-used pots, and a collection of glass jars. Some of the jars still contained dried herbs, their scents faint but still recognizable. Rosemary, thyme, and something that smelled like mint. In the living area, there was a tall bookshelf filled with old books. The books were not fancy or expensive. They were well-read paperbacks, their spines cracked and their pages soft. There were also novels, classic stories of adventure and exploration. Tucked inside one of the books, a guide to identifying wildflowers, she found a collection of pressed leaves. They were beautiful, perfectly preserved specimens of oak, maple, and birch, each one a different shade of autumn. A small, neat label was pasted beside each leaf, written in a careful, spidery handwriting. It felt like a small, secret treasure. She found his bedroom at the back of the cottage. It was a small room, with just enough space for a narrow bed with an iron frame, a small wooden dresser, and a single window that looked out onto the edge of the forest. The bed was neatly made, covered with a heavy wool blanket. It looked as if he had just stepped out for a moment and would be back soon. The feeling of being an intruder returned, stronger this time. She was going through a dead man's things, preparing to sell his home. It felt like a betrayal. She quickly closed the door to the bedroom, deciding to leave that room for later. For now, she would sleep on the sofa in the main room. Every day as the afternoon sun began to lower in the sky, she would stop her work and go for her walk. The walk became a ritual, the anchor of her day. She always took the same path, the one that ran along the edge of the golden field and the dark forest. Each day, she noticed something new. The colors of the leaves on the trees seemed to change daily, becoming deeper and more vibrant. She saw different kinds of birds, and once, she saw a deer standing at the edge of the woods, its large, dark eyes watching her before it turned and disappeared silently into the trees. She never saw the man from her first walk again, but she always looked for him. She would scan the long, empty path, hoping to see his distant figure, but the path was always empty. The image of him in the golden light remained in her mind, a symbol of the peace she was slowly, tentatively, beginning to feel in this quiet valley. After a few days, she ran out of the food she had brought with her from the city. She needed to go into the village and find the store. She felt a little nervous about it. She was still an outsider, and she did not know how she would be received. The village was small, just a single street with a few dozen stone houses, a small church with a pointed steeple, and at the very center, a building with a simple sign that said, Oakhaven General Store. She parked her car and walked towards it. The store had a large window at the front, filled with a random assortment of goods, sacks of flour, tins of soup, rubber boots, and coils of rope. A small bell tinkled above the door as she entered. The inside of the store was dark and cool, and it smelled of sawdust, coffee, and cheese. The shelves were packed from floor to ceiling with all sorts of things, from food and hardware to fishing line and wool socks. Behind a long wooden counter stood an old man. He had a kind, wrinkled face and a thick head of white hair. He was polishing a pair of glasses with a soft cloth. He looked up at her over the rims of his other pair of glasses, which were perched on the end of his nose. His eyes were a pale, clear blue. "Hello," he said. His voice was quiet and slow. "Hello," Anna replied, her own voice sounding a little too loud in the quiet store. "I just need to get a few things. Bread, milk, some eggs." "The milk and eggs are in the cooler at the back," the man said, gesturing with his head. "Clara's bread is on the counter here. She just brought it in an hour ago, still warm." She gathered the rest of her items and brought them back to the counter. The old man packed them into a simple paper bag, his movements slow and deliberate. "You're in the old Miller cottage," he said. It was a statement, not a question. "Yes," Anna said, surprised. "He was my great-uncle." "Just for the autumn," Anna said. repeating the plan she had made for herself. "I'm fixing the place up to sell it." Arthur nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "It's a good time of year in the valley, the quietest time." She was middle-aged, with flour dusting her apron and her kind, round face. "This must be Clara, the baker." She gave Anna a polite but brief smile, a quick look that took in her city clothes and her new face, before turning to speak to Arthur in a low voice. Anna felt like an object of curiosity, the subject of unspoken conversations. She paid for her groceries, thanked Arthur, and left the store, the little bell tinkling behind her. The villagers were not unfriendly, she thought. They were just reserved, watchful. They were a community, and she was an outsider. It would take more than a few days for that to change. Several more days passed. The cottage was slowly transforming. The windows were clean, letting in the clear autumn light. The floors were scrubbed, and the furniture was free of dust. She had even managed to get the old stove working. She had found a pile of chopped wood stacked neatly against the back of the cottage, dry and ready to use. In the evenings, she would build a small fire in the large stone fireplace. The crackling flames filled the room with warmth and a cheerful, dancing light. She would sit in the old armchair, a cup of tea in her hands, and watch the fire, feeling a sense of contentment she had not felt in a very long time. It was on one of her afternoon walks, about a week after she had arrived, that she finally met him. The day was clear and bright, the sky a deep, cloudless blue. The sun was warm on her back as she walked her usual path. She was not thinking about anything in particular, just enjoying the feel of the sun and the air. She rounded a bend in the path where a cluster of large oak trees grew close to the forest's edge, and there he was. He was not far away this time. He was kneeling on the ground, just off the path, near the tree line. He was so focused on what he was doing that he did not hear her approach. She stopped and watched him for a moment. He was carefully gathering something from the ground, placing it into a canvas bag that lay beside him. He was wearing the same kind of simple, dark clothes she had seen him in before. Up close, she could see that his hair was thick and wavy, and his hands, as they moved through the leaves and soil, were steady and gentle. He seemed to be a part of the forest, a natural extension of the quiet, patient world of the trees. She must have made a small sound, perhaps a leaf crunched too loudly under her foot, because he looked up. His eyes were a surprising color, a clear, light green, the color of moss in the sunlight. He looked at her, not with alarm, but with a calm, quiet curiosity. Anna felt her face grow warm. She felt like she had been caught staring. "Hello," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He stood up slowly, brushing the dirt from his knees. He was taller than she had realized. "Hello," he replied. His voice was low and calm, just as she had imagined it would be. An awkward silence fell between them. Anna searched for something to say. "It's a beautiful day," she said finally. It sounded foolish and obvious. He smiled, a small, gentle smile that reached his eyes. "Yes, it is the last of the warm ones, I think. The weather will turn soon. I'm Anna," she said, feeling the need to introduce herself, to explain her presence on his path. "I'm staying at the Miller cottage." "I know," he said, echoing Arthur from the store. "I'm Eamon." He did not offer any more information, no explanation of who he was or what he was doing. He just stood there, looking at her with his calm, green eyes. "What are you gathering?" she asked, gesturing to his bag. He bent down and picked up a small plant, holding it out for her to see. It had dark green leaves and a tiny, pale purple flower. "Herbs," he said simply. "This one is good for tea. It helps with sleep." She looked at the small plant in his hand. He seemed to be a man who paid attention to small things, something she was only just learning to do. The silence returned, but this time it did not feel as awkward. It felt comfortable, like the quiet between two people who did not need to fill every moment with words. "You're from the city," he said. It was another statement, not a question. "Yes," she said. "How did you know?" It was not a criticism. It was a simple observation. Even when you are walking slowly, you are walking fast. Anna thought about this. It was true. Even on her quiet walks, there was a part of her that was still rushing, still pushing forward. The city was still in her, in the rhythm of her steps. Eamon, on the other hand, moved with the slow, patient rhythm of the valley. "I'm trying to slow down," she admitted. He nodded, as if he understood completely. "It takes time," he said. "The valley has its own pace. You can't fight it. You just have to let it happen." He bent down and picked up his canvas bag. "It was nice to meet you, Anna," he said. "It was nice to meet you too, Eamon," she replied. Anna stood there for a long time after he was gone. The encounter had been simple, just a few words exchanged on a path, but it had affected her more than she expected. There was a stillness about him, a deep sense of peace that she found herself drawn to. He was like the valley itself, quiet, a little mysterious, and beautiful in a simple, understated way. She continued her walk, but her steps were slower now, more deliberate. She found herself looking more closely at the ground, at the leaves, at the small plants growing by the side of the path, wondering which ones were good for tea. The weight in her shoulders felt a little lighter. For the first time since arriving, the thought of selling the cottage and leaving Oakhaven brought with it a small, sharp pang of sadness. The walk back to her small stone house felt, for the very first time, like coming home. Chapter 2. The Language of the Valley. The dust was gone, the floors were clean, and the air inside was fresh and smelled of wood smoke and old books. Now the real work began. The cottage was clean, but it was still broken in many small ways. It was a house that had been left alone for too long, and its age was showing. Anna decided to start with the low stone wall that enclosed the small garden. In many places, the stones had tumbled down, leaving gaps like missing teeth. Weeds grew thick and fast through these gaps. It looked neglected and sad. She wanted to fix it. She wanted to make it whole again. The idea of building something, of putting something back together with her own hands, was appealing. It felt like the opposite of her life in the city, which had felt like it was slowly falling apart. They were cool and damp to the touch, covered in patches of dark green and gray moss. She spent a whole morning just gathering the stones, pulling them out of the weeds, and stacking them in a neat pile. Her back ached and her hands were sore and scratched, but she felt a simple satisfaction in the task. She had created order where there had been chaos. That afternoon, she walked into the village, to Arthur's store. The bell tinkled as she entered. Arthur was behind the counter, reading a newspaper. He looked up and gave her a small, kind smile. He was getting used to seeing her now. "I need some help. I want to fix the stone wall at the cottage. I don't know what I need." Arthur folded his newspaper carefully and set it aside. He seemed to enjoy a practical problem. "You'll need mortar," he said. "It's a mix of sand and cement and lime. I have the bags in the back. You just add water. You'll need a good bucket to mix it in and a trowel to put it on with." He led her to a dusty back room of the store, a place filled with tools and bags of building materials. He showed her exactly what she needed, explaining in a slow, careful voice how to mix the powder with water until it was like a thick paste. He showed her how to hold the trowel. He treated her not like a foolish city person, but simply as someone who needed to learn something new. Anna felt a wave of gratitude for his simple, patient kindness. She bought the materials and carried them back to the cottage. The bags were heavy, and she had to make 2 trips. The work was hard, but it felt good. The next morning she began. She took her trowel and a bucket of the mortar and went to the first gap in the wall. She looked at the pile of stones she had gathered. Each one was a different shape, a different size. It was like a puzzle. She had to find which stone would fit best in the space. She tried one, then another, turning them over, seeing how they sat. Finally, she found one that seemed right. She scooped up a thick slab of the wet mortar with her trowel and spread it onto the top of the existing stones in the wall. Then, with both hands, she carefully lifted the new stone and settled it into place, wiggling it gently until it sat firmly in the bed of mortar. She scraped away the excess mortar that squeezed out from the sides. It was slow, painstaking work. Each stone was a small victory. She was not a natural builder. Her first few attempts were clumsy. The mortar was either too wet or too dry. The stones did not sit straight, but she did not get frustrated. She just kept going. The sun climbed higher in the sky, warming her back. The only sounds were the scrape of her trowel against the stone, the soft thud of a stone being set into place, and the distant call of birds. Her mind, usually so full of anxious thoughts, became completely empty. It was filled only with the task at hand, the weight of the stone, the texture of the mortar, the shape of the gap. She was not thinking about the past or the future. She was just there, in that moment, building a wall. It was not perfect. A real stonemason would probably laugh at her work, but it was strong and it was whole. She stood back and looked at what she had done. Her hands were covered in dried mortar. Her muscles ached, but she felt a deep, quiet pride. She had made something. She had repaired something that was broken. That evening, as she sat by the fire, she felt a different kind of tiredness. It was not the empty, draining exhaustion of her city job. It was a good, physical weariness, the feeling of a day well spent. The work on the cottage continued. After the wall, she decided to fix a broken window in the small bedroom. A pane of glass was cracked straight across. The wind would whistle through it at night. Arthur told her where to order a new piece of glass from a town over the mountain. It arrived a week later, carefully wrapped in paper. She spent an entire afternoon learning how to reglaze a window. She watched videos on her phone, propped up on the windowsill. She carefully chipped away the old hard putty that held the broken glass in place. It came away in dry, crumbling pieces. Then she cleaned the wooden frame. She spread the new, soft putty, a sticky, oily substance that smelled like linseed oil. She pressed the new pane of glass into it, carefully, gently. Then she put more putty on the outside, smoothing it with a special tool. The new glass was clear and perfect. It let in the light without the distorting line of the crack. It was another small thing, but it made the cottage feel more like a home, more cared for. The physical labor was quieting her mind in a way she had never experienced. The constant buzz of anxiety was being replaced by the simple focus on the task in front of her. Her afternoon walks continued to be the anchor of her day. After a day of working on the cottage, she would wash her hands, put on her jacket, and head out onto the path by the field. She began to see Eamon more often. It was never planned. It just seemed to happen. She would be walking in one direction, and he would be coming from the other. Or sometimes she would find him near the edge of the forest, gathering his herbs or just standing and watching the light change. Their meetings were always brief at first. A simple hello, a comment on the weather, a shared moment of watching a hawk circle high overhead. But slowly, their walks began to lengthen. They would fall into step together, walking along the path in a comfortable silence. Eamon was a quiet person. He did not talk a lot, but when he did speak, it was always to point something out, something she never would have noticed on her own. One day, as they were walking past a large, ancient oak tree, he stopped and placed his hand on its trunk. "Look here," he said in his low, calm voice. He pointed to the thick layer of green moss growing on one side of the trunk. "This is the north side. The moss always grows thickest on the north side, where there is less sun. It likes the cool and the damp. Anna had seen moss on trees 1,000 times, but she had never really looked at it. She had never thought about why it grew where it did. She reached out and touched it. It was soft and damp, like a velvet blanket. It was a tiny, living world of its own. Another day, they were walking, and he suddenly stopped and held up a hand, signaling for her to be quiet. She stood still and listened. At first, she heard nothing but the wind. Then she heard it, a sharp, repeated bird call. "That's a robin," he whispered. "It's a warning call. It means he's seen a predator, maybe a fox or a cat." They stood and listened for a few minutes. The call came again, closer this time. Then they heard a different call, the loud, harsh caw of a crow. "The crow is answering," Eamon said. "He's telling the other crows what the robin saw." Anna was amazed. She had always just heard birdsong. She had never realized it was a language, a complex system of communication happening all around her, all the time. The valley was not silent. It was full of conversations she was only just beginning to overhear. Their walks sometimes took them off the main path and into the edges of the forest. Anna had always found the forest a little intimidating. It was dark and dense, and it felt like it held old secrets. But with Eamon, she felt safe. He moved through the woods with a quiet confidence, as if he knew every tree and every stone. He showed her things she would have walked right past. He pointed out the faint, barely visible trails that the deer used to move through the undergrowth. He showed her a patch of flattened grass under a thick pine tree where a deer had slept the night before. He showed her a stream she had not known existed, a ribbon of clear cold water that tumbled over mossy rocks. The water made a soft musical sound. The forest began to feel less like a dark, mysterious place and more like a home to countless living things. As they walked, Eamon sometimes shared stories about the valley. They were not grand historical tales. They were small, simple stories, the kind that get passed down from one generation to the next. He pointed to a large, oddly shaped boulder that sat alone in the middle of the golden field. "My grandfather told me that a giant dropped that stone from his pocket as he was walking over the mountain," he said with a small smile. "And he said that if you lie with your ear against it on a quiet night, you can still hear the giant's heartbeat." He told her about the old woman who used to live in a cottage that was now just a ruin of fallen stones. He said she could talk to the birds and that she taught them new songs. The stories were simple, almost like fairy tales, but they changed the way Anna saw the landscape. The boulder was no longer just a rock. It was the giant stone. The forest was no longer just a collection of trees. It was a place of secrets and stories. Eamon talked about the valley as if it were a living thing, a friend he had known his whole life. He spoke its language, the language of moss and bird calls and old stories. And Anna, slowly, was beginning to learn it too. One afternoon, she noticed that his hands were stained. The tips of his fingers were a deep purple, the color of dark berries. "What is that on your hands?" she asked, her curiosity getting the better of her. He looked down at his own hands, as if surprised to see the stains there. He seemed a little shy, a little hesitant to answer. "It's from berries," he said finally. "For my paints, your paints," Anna asked, intrigued. "You're a painter?" He gave a small shrug. "I try to be," he said. "It's just something I do." Anna was fascinated. She had never met anyone who made their own paints. "What kind of paints?" she asked. "I use things from the valley," he explained, seeming too warm to the subject now that she was genuinely interested. "I use berries for the purples and reds. I use different kinds of clay from the stream bed for browns and yellows. I use soot from the fire for black. I make ink from oak galls." The idea was incredible to her. He was literally painting the valley with itself. "I would love to see your art sometime," she said, hoping she was not being too bold. He was quiet for a moment, and she thought perhaps she had overstepped. But then he looked at her with his clear green eyes and nodded. "All right," he said, "if you like." A few days later, he led her to his home. It was a small cottage, much like her own, but it was on the other side of the village, closer to the mountain. Inside, it was simple and clean. One room had been turned into a workshop. There was a large wooden table covered in jars, bowls, and bundles of dried plants. The air smelled of earth, herbs, and something sharp and clean, like turpentine, but more natural. On the walls, and stacked in neat piles against the walls, were his paintings. Anna stood in the doorway, speechless. The paintings were beautiful. They were simple, but they captured the spirit of the valley perfectly. He had painted the things he had shown her. There was a painting of the ancient oak tree, the moss on its north side, a deep, rich green. There was a painting of the deer trail leading into the dark woods, the light filtering through the leaves. There was a painting of the golden field, the long grass bending in the wind. His colors were not the bright, artificial colors of paints from a tube. They were the subtle, earthy colors of the valley itself. The soft brown of wet clay, the deep purple of crushed elderberries, the pale gray of stone. His art was not just a picture of the valley. It felt like it was the valley's soul, captured on paper. "They're amazing, Eamon," she said, her voice full of genuine awe. "They're so alive." He seemed pleased by her reaction, but also a little embarrassed by the praise. "I just paint what I see," he said simply. She walked slowly around the room, looking at each painting. She saw the giant's boulder, the little stream with its mossy rocks, a close-up of a robin with its bright orange breast. Looking at his art, she saw the valley through his eyes. She saw the beauty in the small, simple things that she was only just beginning to notice. He was not just living in the valley. He was in a constant, creative conversation with it. He was listening to its language, and then he was translating it into images. The discovery of his art changed something in her. It deepened her understanding of both him and the place. He was not just a quiet man who gathered herbs. He was an artist, a chronicler of this small, forgotten world. And the valley was not just a quiet place to escape the city. It was a place of immense beauty and inspiration, a place worthy of being painted with its own substance. Her own work on the cottage felt more meaningful now. When she was mixing the gray mortar to fix the wall, she thought of the gray clay Eamon used for his paints. When she was looking through the new, clear pane of glass in the window, she thought of the way he captured the clear autumn light in his paintings. She was not just fixing a house. She was becoming a part of the valley's life, in her own small way. The days grew shorter and the air grew colder. The brilliant reds and yellows of the leaves began to fade, turning to a deep, rusty brown. They fell from the trees, carpeting the ground in a thick, crunchy blanket. Autumn was ending. Winter was coming. Anna realized with a jolt that she had been in Oakhaven for almost 2 months. The time had passed so quickly, in a slow, steady rhythm of work and walks. She thought about her plan, the simple, practical plan she had arrived with. Fix the cottage, sell it, go back to the city. The words sounded foreign to her now, like a plan made by a different person. Go back to the city. The thought of the noise, the crowds, the hollow feeling of her old life filled her with a sense of dread. Here she felt real. Her hands were calloused from her work. Her face had color from the wind and the sun. Her mind was quiet. She was sleeping better than she had in years, without the help of the herbs Eamon had first told her about. One evening, she was sitting by the fire in the armchair. The fire crackled and hissed, casting a warm orange glow on the stone walls. Her section of the garden wall was finished. The windows were all secure. The cottage felt snug and safe. It felt like a home. She looked around the room, at the books on the shelf, at the simple wooden furniture, at the firelight dancing on the walls. She thought about leaving this place. She thought about a stranger coming in, someone who did not know about the giant stone, or the language of the birds, or the moss on the north side of the trees. She thought about them selling off her great-uncle's books, painting over the old walls with some fashionable, sterile color. The thought was painful. It felt like a betrayal, not just of her great-uncle, but of the valley itself. The plan to sell the cottage was no longer a practical solution. It was a question that hung in the quiet air. Could she really leave? Could she go back to a world that felt so empty, now that she had tasted a life that felt so full? She did not have an answer. For the first time, she did not need one. She was content to sit by the fire in the quiet of her small stone house and just be. The future was a blank page, just like one of Eamon's pieces of paper before he touched it with his earthy paints. And for the first time in a very long time, that felt not like a frightening void, but like a world of possibility. Chapter 3. A distant rumble. The piece Anna had found in the valley was a fragile thing, like a soap bubble, beautiful and shimmering but easily broken. She had not realized how fragile it was until the day the bubble was touched by something sharp. Something from the world she had left behind. It happened on a crisp, clear morning. The last of the brown leaves were clinging to the trees, and the air had the clean, cold bite of coming winter. Anna was in the small garden behind the cottage. She had spent the morning pulling up the last of the stubborn weeds from around the base of the stone wall she had so carefully repaired. The work was satisfying. Her hands were cold and dirty, and her breath made small white clouds in the air. The silence was perfect, broken only by the sound of her own movements and the distant, lonely caw of a crow. Then, a new sound entered the silence. It was a low hum. It was not the sound of Arthur's old truck, which rattled and coughed its way through the village. It was a smooth, deep, powerful sound. It grew louder, and Anna stood up, wiping her hands on her trousers, and looked down the lane towards the village. A car was coming, but it was not a car she had ever seen in Oakhaven. It was long and black and so shiny it looked wet. It reflected the pale morning sun in a way that hurt her eyes. It moved slowly, almost silently now that it was on the dirt lane, but it still seemed aggressive, like a shark cruising through a pond of goldfish. It was completely out of place against the backdrop of old stone cottages and bare trees. It was a piece of the city, a piece of the world of money and speed and impatience, and it had found its way into her quiet valley. She watched as it drove slowly past her cottage, continuing down the path that led towards the open fields. She could see two figures inside, just dark shapes behind the tinted glass. The car stopped at the end of the lane, right where her walking path began. The engine cut out, and the silence that rushed back in felt different now. It felt like the silence after a loud noise, a silence that was aware of what had just disturbed it. Anna stood by her garden wall, a strange feeling of unease settling in her stomach like a cold stone. She felt a prickle of resentment. This was her path. This was her quiet place. The black car sat there, huge and foreign, a dark blot on the landscape. It was an invasion. She tried to put it out of her mind. She went back to her work, pulling weeds with more force than was necessary, but she could not stop glancing towards the car. After a few minutes, the doors opened. Two men got out. They were not dressed for the country. They wore dark, sharp suits and shiny black shoes that were completely wrong for the muddy path. One man was talking into a phone, his voice sharp and loud in the still air. The other man opened the trunk of the car and took out a strange piece of equipment, a tripod with a complicated-looking device on top. They walked a little way into the golden field, their shiny shoes sinking into the soft earth. They did not seem to notice or care. They were focused on their task, pointing, talking, gesturing. One of them hammered a thin wooden stake with a bright pink ribbon tied to it into the ground. The stake looked like a wound in the golden field. Anna stopped working. She just watched them. They were intruders. They did not belong. They did not look at the mountains, or the forest, or the light. They looked at the land as if it were a blank piece of paper on which they could draw their own plans. They had the same kind of energy she remembered from her old job, an impatient, demanding energy that saw the world only in terms of profit and progress. The sight of them made her feel a low, simmering anger. She did not know why. It was not her land. She was just a temporary visitor herself, but she had come to love this field. She had walked beside it every day. She had watched the light change on the long grass. She had seen deer grazing here in the early morning, and these men, with their suits and their stakes, were violating it. They stayed for about an hour. They walked the length of the field, hammering in more of the Pinkerbond stakes. Then they packed up their equipment, got back into their silent, black car, and drove away, leaving the stakes behind them as a scar on the landscape. Anna watched them go, the cold stone of unease in her stomach having grown heavier. The valley felt different now. The peace had been broken. The outside world had found Oakhaven. Later that day, she needed to buy some milk and flour, so she walked into the village. The air in the store felt different too. Usually, Arthur's store was a calm/slow-moving place. But today, there was a tension in the air. Arthur was behind the counter, but he was not reading his newspaper. He was staring out the front window, a deep line of worry etched between his eyebrows. Clara, the baker, was there too. She was not talking about her bread or the weather. She and Arthur were speaking in low, hushed tones. "Hello, Anna," Arthur said, but his voice lacked its usual warmth. "Did you see them?" Clara asked, her round face pinched with worry. "The men in the car?" "Yes," Anna said. "I saw them. They put stakes in the big field." Arthur sighed, a long, heavy sound. He looked old and tired. Anna asked, her own feeling of dread growing stronger. Arthur looked at her, his pale blue eyes full of a deep sadness. "A development company bought the old farmland," he said. "All of it, from the edge of the village right up to the forest. The family that owned it hasn't lived here for 50 years. They live in the city. To them, it's just an empty piece of land on a map. They sold it for a lot of money. A development company." Anna repeated the words. They sounded ugly in the quiet store. "What are they going to develop?" "Luxury holiday homes," Clara said, her voice full of disgust. "That's what they're calling them. Big, modern houses with huge windows and hot tubs. A private clubhouse, maybe a golf course, for rich people from the city who want to come here for a weekend." Anna felt a wave of cold shock. She pictured it in her mind. The beautiful, golden field. The field where she walked, where deer slept, where the giant stones sat in silent watchfulness, being bulldozed. She imagined the noise of construction, the roar of trucks and machines, shattering the valley's silence forever. The thought was horrifying. It would not just change the valley, it would kill it. It would destroy the very thing that made it special. It's quiet, but they can't do that, can they? Anna asked, a note of desperation in her voice. This place is special. It's old. They have the law on their side, Arthur said, his voice heavy. They bought the land. They can get the permits. For them, this place isn't special. It's an opportunity. It's money waiting to be made. The quiet tension that had settled over the village now had a name. It was fear. The few families that lived in Oakhaven had been here for generations. Their lives were woven into the fabric of the valley. They did not have much money, but they had this place. They had the quiet, the clean air, the community. The development would bring noise and traffic and a way of life that was completely alien to them. It would turn their home into a playground for strangers. The tourists would come for the beauty, but the very act of them coming would destroy it. Anna left the store with her groceries, but she barely noticed what she was carrying. Her mind was racing. She walked back to her cottage, but she did not go inside. She walked past her garden wall and onto her path, the path that now felt threatened. She walked towards the field. The pink-ribboned stakes were still there, bright and ugly against the muted colors of the late autumn landscape. They were a declaration of war, a war that the valley seemed destined to lose. She walked for a long time, her feet taking her automatically along the familiar route. She needed to see Eamon. She did not know why, but she felt a desperate need to talk to him, to see what he thought. He was the one who understood this place more than anyone. He was the one whose entire life and art were drawn from the very land that was now under threat. She found him at the edge of the forest, not far from where she had first met him. He was not gathering herbs. He was just standing there, his hands in his pockets, staring out at the field and the stakes that dotted it. His back was to her, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. The easy, calm grace she had always seen in him was gone. He looked stiff and worried. She walked up to him quietly. He did not seem to hear her approach until she was right beside him. It was replaced by a deep, raw pain. He looked like someone who had just been told a loved one was dying. "You saw them," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," she whispered. "Arthur told me what they're planning." Eamon turned back to look at the field. "This is where I find the clay for my paints," he said, his voice low and tight. "The brown clay and the yellow ochre. It's a special kind of clay. You only find it here, near the stream bed." He pointed to a place she could not see, and over there he gestured towards the forest's edge. "That's where the best elderberries grow, the ones that make the deepest purple. I've been gathering them from that same spot since I was a boy. My grandmother showed me." He was not just talking about paint ingredients. He was talking about his history, his memory, his connection to this specific piece of earth. The development was not just a threat to a landscape. It was a threat to his identity, to his art, to his entire world. "They will dig it all up," he said, his voice hollow. "They will bring in their machines, and they will tear it all apart. They will cover it with concrete and perfect green grass that isn't real grass. They won't see the clay, won't see the berries. They will just see an empty space to build their houses." Anna could feel his pain as if it were her own. She saw his beautiful earthy paintings in her mind, the paintings made from the very soul of this land. How could he paint the valley when the valley itself was gone? He would be an artist with no subject and no materials. "There must be something we can do," she said, though the words felt weak and hopeless. Eamon shook his head slowly, his eyes still fixed on the field. "What can we do? We are a few poor people in a forgotten village. They are a big company from the city. They have money and lawyers. We have nothing." For the first time since she had met him, Eamon looked defeated. The quiet strength she had admired in him seemed to have drained away, leaving only a deep sadness. Seeing him like this, so full of despair, sparked something in Anna. It was the low, simmering anger she had felt that morning when she first saw the black car. But now it was no longer low and simmering. It was a hot, sharp flame in her chest. She had learned to not care too much about things as a way to protect herself from disappointment. In her old life, she would have seen this situation, this fight between a small village and a big company, and she would have felt a distant, sad sympathy. She would have thought, "That's a shame," and then she would have moved on, because it was not her fight. But this felt different. This felt personal. But most of all, she was angry that they were threatening this fragile peace she had found. She had come to Oakhaven, broken and weary, and this place, this quiet valley, this slow rhythm of life, had started to heal her. The physical work on the cottage had quieted her mind. The walks along this very path had soothed her soul. The friendship with Eamon had opened her eyes to a new way of seeing the world. She had started to build a new self here, a self that was stronger and calmer and more real than the person she had been in the city. The anger she felt was a protective instinct. It was the feeling of a mother animal protecting its young. And in that moment, she realized she was protecting herself. She was protecting this new, fragile Anna that had been born in the Oakhaven Valley. "You're wrong. We don't have nothing." Eamon turned to look at her, a flicker of surprise in his sad eyes. "But we have knowledge. You know every plant, every stone. Arthur knows the history of every family. We have that. And that has to be worth something." She did not have a plan. The anger had burned away the despair. In her old life in the city, she had felt powerless, a small cog in a giant, uncaring machine. But here, in this small valley, the fight felt different. It was not abstract. It was right here, in front of her. It was about a field, and some clay, and a man's art, and her own chance at a peaceful life. And that was something worth fighting for. He did not smile, but the tight line of his mouth softened just a little. For a long moment they stood together in silence, two small figures against the vastness of the valley. The distant rumble of the city had reached their quiet home, but now, instead of just listening to it with fear, they were preparing to answer back. The bubble of peace had been broken, but Anna was no longer content to just watch the pieces fall. She was going to try to put them back together. Chapter 4. A common path. But inside her, something else had taken root. It was the anger she had felt standing with Eamon, the anger that had burned away her own hopelessness. It was a strange feeling. For years, she had avoided strong emotions. She had built walls around her heart to keep from feeling too much. But this anger felt clean and pure. It was not a destructive anger. It was a protective fire. She got out of the sofa bed, the air in the cottage cold against her skin, and she did not feel weary. She felt awake. She felt like she had a purpose. The sun was just beginning to rise, a pale, watery light behind the eastern mountains. The world was gray and quiet. She did not walk towards her usual path along the field. She walked through the sleeping village, her footsteps loud on the stony road. She walked to the other side of Oakhaven, to the small cottage where Eamon lived. A thin trail of smoke was already rising from his chimney. She knocked on his door. She did not know what she would say. She only knew that they had to start. He looked like he had not slept. His green eyes were clouded with worry, and his face was pale. He looked at her, surprised to see her so early. "We have to walk," she said, her voice quiet but firm, but not like before. "We need to walk with a purpose. You said they are going to build on the field and up to the forest. We need to walk on that land. You need to show me everything. Every special plant, every old tree, everything that they will destroy. We need to make a list. We need to write it all down. We need to have proof that this land is not empty." Eamon stared at her. He saw the fire in her eyes, the firm set of her jaw. He saw that she was not going to give up. A long, slow breath went out of him, like he had been holding it all night. He nodded, a single, slow movement. "All right," he said. "Get your bag and bring something to write with." Before, their walks had been aimless wanderings, a way to enjoy the peace of the valley. Now, they were expeditions. They were surveys. They became a team, working with a quiet, shared focus. Their path was no longer the comfortable, well-worn track by the side of the field. They now walked directly on the land that was threatened, stepping carefully over the long, damp grass, their boots sinking into the soft earth. They walked among the pink-ribboned stakes, these ugly markers of the future. Each stake felt like a desecration, a violation of the land's gentle contours. The quiet, sometimes shy man she knew was replaced by a focused, knowledgeable guide. He was the keeper of the valley's secrets, and now he was sharing them with her. He carried a canvas bag, But instead of just gathering herbs for himself, he would gather specimens for their record. Anna carried a small, hard-backed notebook and a pencil. Her handwriting, usually a quick, messy scrawl from years of city life, became slow and careful. She wanted to get every detail right. He led her to a part of the forest's edge she had never seen before, a place where the trees grew thick and ancient. He stopped in front of a massive oak tree. It was far bigger than any other tree she had seen in the valley. Its trunk was thick and gnarled, its bark like a deeply wrinkled old face. It would take 3 people to link arms around it. "This is the oldest tree in the valley," Eamon said, his voice full of reverence. He placed a hand on its rough bark. "My grandfather said his grandfather told him that this tree was already old when the first stones of the village were laid. It has been standing here for hundreds of years. It has seen every season, every person who has ever lived in this valley." Anna looked up at its vast, spreading branches, bare against the gray sky. They were like a complicated map, each branch a different road. She wrote in her notebook, "Ancient oak tree, east side of the field, near the forest line, very large, very old, witness tree." She felt foolish writing the last 2 words, but it felt true. This tree was a witness to history. They spent hours just in that one small section of the woods. Eamon showed her things she would have walked past 1,000,000 times without seeing. He knelt down in the damp leaf litter and gently brushed away the dead leaves. Underneath, there was a patch of small, delicate ferns, their leaves a lacy, intricate pattern. "These are a special kind of fern," he said. "They only grow in the shade of very old oak trees. They need the special kind of soil that the oak leaves make when they rot." Anna carefully sketched the shape of the fern in her notebook, labeling it. They found a small, almost hidden spring bubbling up from between 2 mossy rocks. The water was so clear it was almost invisible. "This spring feeds the little stream that runs through the field," Eamon explained. "It's where the animals come to drink. The deer, the foxes, even the badgers. If they build here, they will either cover it up or the water will be polluted. The animals will have to go somewhere else." Anna wrote it all down, her fingers growing numb with the cold. Day after day, they walked the threatened land. The weather grew colder. Some mornings, a thick frost covered everything, making the world look like it was made of silver and glass. Their footsteps crunched loudly on the frozen grass. On other days, a cold, persistent drizzle would fall, soaking their jackets and making the ground muddy and slick. But they did not stop. Their shared purpose kept them warm. It was a small, steady flame against the cold and the worry. Eamon's knowledge was astonishing. He was a walking library of the valley's natural history. He showed her a species of mushroom that only grew on the decaying logs of fallen birch trees. He pointed out a type of wildflower, now just a dry stalk with a seed head, that had a beautiful blue flower in the spring and was a favorite of a certain kind of butterfly. He knew which birds nested in which trees. He knew where the rabbits had their burrows. He knew the land not as a single thing, but as a complex community of thousands of living things, all connected, all depending on each other. Anna's notebook filled up with lists, sketches, and notes. The pages became smudged with dirt and warped by the damp. It was becoming a document, a testament to the life that was invisible to the men in the shiny black car. As she wrote, she realized how blind she had been. She had thought the valley was beautiful, but she had only seen the surface. She had seen the big picture, the mountains, the field, the forest. Eamon was teaching her to see the details, the tiny, intricate, and vital parts that made up the whole. Her appreciation for the valley deepened, and so did her anger at those who wanted to destroy it. While Eamon was the expert on the land itself, Anna began to realize that she had a skill to contribute to, a skill from her old life, a skill she thought she had left behind. In the city, her job had been as a researcher for a large firm. It had been a soulless job, digging up information for corporate clients, finding facts and figures to help them make more money. She had been good at it, but she had hated it. But now, she wondered if she could use that skill for a different purpose, for a good purpose. "We have all this information about the land," she said to Eamon one afternoon, as they sat on a fallen log, sharing a flask of hot tea. "But it's just our word against theirs. We need something more. We need something official, something legal." "Like what?" Eamon asked. He was a man of the earth, not of paper and laws. "I don't know," Anna admitted, "but every piece of land has a history, a paper history. Deeds, maps, old surveys. Maybe there's something in that history, something that could help us, something they've missed." The idea took hold in her mind. It was a long shot, but it was something. It was a way for her to fight back using her own weapons. The next day, she told Eamon she needed to go to the regional town, the one over the mountain. The county archives were there. It was where all the old public records were kept. He was not comfortable with the world outside the valley, but he saw the determination on her face. "Be careful," was all he said. The drive over the mountain was a strange experience. As she left the quiet dirt lanes of Oakhaven and got back onto a paved modern road, she felt a sense of anxiety return. The world seemed to be moving too fast again. The cars that passed her were loud and aggressive. The small town was bustling and noisy compared to the village. She felt like a stranger again, an outsider. She realized how much the valley had changed her in just a few months. She was no longer used to the rush of the modern world. The county archive building was an old, stern-looking stone building in the center of the town. Inside, it was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet from the valley. It was a dry, dusty, indoor quiet. It smelled of old paper and floor polish. A severe-looking woman with glasses on a chain sat behind a large desk. Anna explained what she was looking for: any and all records related to the tracts of farmland on the edge of the village of Oakhaven. The woman looked at her with disinterest, but she pointed her towards a series of large, heavy books on high shelves and a room full of metal cabinets containing old maps. Anna spent the entire day there. It felt strangely familiar, this process of hunting for information, but the feeling behind it was completely different. Before, she had been a hunter for hire. Now, she was hunting for herself, for her home. She pulled down the heavy books of land deeds. The pages were thick and yellowed with age, filled with dense, spidery handwriting from 100 years ago. She carefully read through the legal language, trying to trace the ownership of the land back through the decades. It was slow, boring work. Her eyes started to ache from deciphering the old script. She moved on to the maps. She pulled out large, rolled-up maps from the metal cabinets and spread them out on a huge table. There were maps from 50 years ago, 100 years ago, even older. The village of Oakhaven looked almost the same on all of them, a small cluster of dots. But the land around it was sometimes labeled differently. Miller Farm, Oakhaven Common, Westfield. She took pictures of the most interesting maps with her phone, carefully documenting everything. She found nothing obvious, no clear reason why the land could not be developed. She felt a growing sense of disappointment. Maybe Eamon was right. Maybe they had nothing. But she refused to give up. Before she left, on a whim, she asked the woman at the desk if there were any other records. Anything at all related to the area. Environmental surveys, historical society papers, anything. The woman sighed, annoyed at the extra work, but she pointed to a small, forgotten-looking corner of the archive. "The parish records might be in there," she said. "Church records, old council meeting notes. It's mostly unorganized." Anna spent another hour in that dusty corner, pulling out cardboard boxes filled with loose papers. Most of it was useless. But then, in a box labeled Oakhaven Parish Council, 1920 to 1940, she found something. It was a thin folder containing the minutes from a series of meetings in the 1930s. The pages were typed on an old typewriter. The ink faded. She read through them quickly. It was mostly about repairing the village well and organizing a harvest festival. But then one entry caught her eye. It was about a dispute. A new landowner, the grandfather of the family who had just sold the land, had wanted to drain a part of the field for a new kind of crop, but the council had denied his request. And there was a mention of something else, a botanical survey that had been commissioned at the time. A professor from a university had come to the valley to study its plant life. The minutes mentioned his report. Anna's heart started to beat a little faster. A botanical survey, a scientific report, a slim, bound report with the title A Study of the Unique Flora of the Oakhaven Valley, dated 1934. She opened it with trembling hands. She drove back to the valley as the sun was setting, the precious report sitting on the passenger seat beside her like a treasure. She did not know what was in it yet, but it felt important. It felt like she had found a voice from the past, a voice that might be able to speak for the valley now. That night, she did not build a big, cheerful fire. She built a small, focused one, and she lit the oil lamp and placed it on the table. She spread the old maps out on the floor. She sat with the 1934 report in her lap and began to read. Eamon came over. He had been waiting for her, a worried look on his face. She showed him what she had found. He sat with her. The two of them bent over the old documents in the small pool of light from the lamp, the rest of the cottage in shadow. The work of walking the land and the work of digging through the past brought them closer. Their shared purpose was like a strong, invisible thread connecting them. They spent almost all their waking hours together. They would walk for hours during the day, gathering their evidence from the land itself, and in the evenings, they would sit in her cottage by the fire, poring over the maps and the old report she had found. Their conversations began to change. They were no longer just about the task at hand. In the quiet moments, as they sat sharing a simple meal of bread and cheese, or as they rested on a high ridge looking down at the valley, they began to share parts of themselves. The walls they both kept around their hearts began to crumble, slowly and gently. Anna found herself telling him things she had never told anyone. She told him about her job in the city, not just the tasks she did, but the feeling it gave her, the feeling of being a ghost, of being invisible, of her work having no real meaning. She described the constant noise, the feeling of being trapped in a small apartment high in the sky, disconnected from the earth. She told him about the deep, aching loneliness she had felt, a loneliness that was even worse when she was surrounded by millions of people. Eamon listened patiently, his green eyes full of a deep, quiet understanding. He did not offer easy solutions or platitudes. He just listened, and then he began to share his own story. He told her why he had never left the valley. He told her that when he was young, he had felt the pull of the outside world. He had thought about going to a city, to an art school, but he had been afraid that the noise and the rush would silence the quiet voice inside him that told him what to paint. He was afraid he would lose his connection to this place, the only place that had ever felt like home. He told her about his grandmother, the one who had taught him about the herbs and the berries. He said she was the one who had encouraged his art, who had told him that painting the valley was an important job. She said that my paintings were a way of remembering, he told Anna, his voice soft in the firelight, a way of holding onto the things that the world was trying to forget. Their shared vulnerabilities were another thread between them, pulling them closer. They were two very different people, one from the city and one from the valley, but they understood each other's fears. For her, it was the new self she was just beginning to discover. One day, they decided to climb higher than they ever had before. Eamon knew a path, a faint, difficult trail that led up the side of the western mountain to a high, rocky ridge. He said the view from there was the best in the whole valley. The climb was hard work. They had to scramble over rocks and push their way through thick undergrowth. Anna was breathless, her legs aching, but the physical effort felt good. It felt like they were climbing towards something important. They reached the ridge in the late afternoon. The sun was beginning its slow descent, and the light was turning golden. The view was breathtaking, more beautiful than anything Anna had ever seen. The entire valley of Oakhaven was spread out below them like a map. They could see the whole patchwork of fields, the dark green of the forest, the little cluster of stone houses with their thin trails of smoke. From up here, the pink stakes in the field were just tiny, insignificant dots. The valley looked vast and ancient and peaceful. They stood there for a long time, not speaking, just looking. The wind was stronger up here, cold and clean. It whipped Anna's hair across her face. She felt a profound sense of peace, a feeling of being on top of the world, of seeing everything clearly. She looked at the valley, their valley, the place they were fighting for. And then she looked at Eamon. He was standing beside her, looking out at the view. The golden late afternoon sun lit up his face, catching the color of his hair. His expression was one of quiet awe. He was not just seeing a beautiful landscape. He was seeing his home, his life, his art, his history. Anna felt a sudden, overwhelming wave of emotion. It was more than friendship. It was a deep, powerful feeling of connection, of rightness. It was the feeling of no longer being alone. He must have felt her looking at him because he turned his head and met her gaze. His green eyes were clear and deep. In that moment, on that high ridge, with the whole world spread out below them, something passed between them. It was not spoken. There were no words. There did not need to be. It was an understanding. A quiet, certain knowledge that their paths had not just crossed, but had merged. They were on this path together now, wherever it might lead. The sun sank lower, casting long shadows across the valley, and they stood there together, two small figures in the vast, quiet light. Their shared purpose and their growing affection, a silent, powerful bond between them. Chapter 5. The Voice of the Village. The letter arrived on a cold, gray morning. It was not addressed to Anna personally. It announced a public meeting to be held in the village hall in 1 week's time. The development company, the one that had bought the fields, would be there. They would present their plans for the Oakhaven estates and golf retreat. They invited all residents to attend, to ask questions, and to learn about the exciting new future for the valley. The tone of the letter was bright and cheerful, full of words like opportunity, progress, and community enhancement. A new kind of tension fell over the village. The quiet worry of the past few weeks turned into a nervous, anxious energy. People gathered in small groups outside Arthur's store, their voices low and troubled. The meeting felt like a final judgment. It felt like the day the fate of their valley would be decided by strangers in suits. The villagers felt powerless. They were farmers and bakers and a handful of elderly people who had lived here their whole lives. What could they say to a powerful company with endless money and clever lawyers? Anna and Eamon worked even harder during that week. The looming deadline gave their work a new urgency. In the evenings, they sat at the table in Anna's cottage, the fire crackling in the hearth, and they organized their evidence. They had Anna's notebook, now thick with her careful notes and sketches of plants and trees. They had the specimens Eamon had collected, pressed ferns, dried berries, labeled bags of different colored clays. And most importantly, they had the old botanical report from 1934. Anna read the report over and over again until she almost knew it by heart. The professor who had written it was a man with a poet's soul. He did not just list the plants he had found. He wrote about the valley's unique ecosystem with a deep sense of wonder and respect. He described the delicate balance between the forest and the field, the way the soil and the water worked together to create a special environment. And then, on page 12, Anna had found the key. The professor wrote about discovering a very rare and specific type of wild orchid. It was a small, unassuming flower, he wrote, easily overlooked. "That's it," Anna had said to Eamon, her voice a hushed, excited whisper. "This is it. This has to be it." A slow light of understanding dawned on his face. "I know that place," he said. "I know those flowers. They come up in the early summer. They are very small, a pale white color. I always thought they were pretty, but I didn't know they were special." "They are special, Eamon," Anna said, her heart beating fast. "And because they are special, they might be protected. There are laws now, laws to protect rare species and their habitats, laws that this professor in 1934 couldn't have even imagined." This was their weapon, not just the beauty of the valley, not just the old stories. This was something concrete, something legal. It was a fact, recorded by a scientist, that a protected species lived on the very land the company wanted to bulldoze. It was a tiny flower against a giant corporation. It felt like a story from a children's book, but it was real, and it was their only hope. The night of the meeting arrived. The village hall was a simple one-room building with a wooden floor and a small stage at one end. It was usually used for harvest festivals and children's parties. Tonight, it felt like a courtroom. The room was filled with folding chairs, and almost every single resident of Oakhaven was there. They sat in stiff, uncomfortable silence. They were dressed in their best clothes, as if for a funeral. Their faces were etched with worry. Arthur was there, his usual kind expression replaced by a grim resignation. Clara the baker was there, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Anna and Eamon sat together near the back. Anna's hands were cold and clammy. She held her notebook tightly in her lap. It felt both heavy and small, a flimsy shield against the coming attack. Eamon sat beside her, still and silent as a stone. He was wearing a clean, dark wool sweater, and he looked deeply uncomfortable being indoors, surrounded by so many people. He kept his eyes fixed on the floor. He had brought a small, flat box with him. Inside, carefully arranged on a bed of cotton, were some of his paintings. Small, detailed studies of the plants and animals they were trying to save. It was his form of testimony. The men from the company arrived right on time. There were 3 of them. They were the same men Anna had seen in the black car, but now they were not wearing suits. They were wearing expensive casual clothes, soft sweaters, and smart trousers. It was a costume, an attempt to look friendly and approachable. They set up a large screen at the front of the room and a projector. They moved with a confident, easy air, as if they owned the room, as if the outcome of this meeting was already decided. One of the men, the leader, stepped up to the front. He was handsome, with silver hair and a smooth, practiced voice. He introduced himself and his company. He spoke for a long time. He used all the cheerful, empty words from the letter. He talked about synergy and investment and a vibrant future. He showed them the presentation. On the big screen, a series of slick, computer-generated images appeared. They showed beautiful, modern houses of glass and wood, with perfect green lawns. They showed smiling, happy families having barbecues on their decks. They showed a pristine, rolling golf course where the golden field should have been. They showed a private clubhouse with a swimming pool and a tennis court. The images were beautiful in a sterile, unreal way. But to the people of Oakhaven, they were a horror show. Each image was a picture of their home being erased. The presentation was a vision of a future that had no place for them. Anna watched the faces of the villagers. When the presentation was over, the man with the silver hair smiled his bright, empty smile again. "So, he said in his smooth, confident voice. "We're so excited to bring this opportunity to Oakhaven, but we know you must have questions. We're here to listen." A heavy silence filled the room. No one moved. No one spoke. What could they say? How could they argue against these beautiful, impossible pictures? The company man's smile faltered for a moment. The silence stretched on. It became a presence in the room, a heavy, suffocating blanket. It was the silence of defeat. Anna felt a surge of her protective anger. She could not let it end like this. She could not let them be silenced. She looked at Eamon. He was still staring at the floor, his face pale. She knew he could not speak. Not here. Not in front of all these people. His language was the language of the forest, not of a public meeting. She took a deep breath. At the front of the room, a figure was slowly getting to its feet. As they walked, not in a grand, anxious way, but in a simple, practical way. They talked about the coming seasons in Oakhaven. Eamon told her what to expect in the winter. He told her about the way the ice formed in beautiful, intricate patterns along the edges of the stream. He told her about the specific, quiet beauty of the woods in the snow, the way you could see the tracks of the animals so clearly, the delicate prints of a fox, the bounding trail of a rabbit. He talked about the long, quiet evenings by the fire, time for mending tools and reading books. Anna listened, and for the first time, the thought of a long, dark winter did not fill her with dread. It sounded peaceful. It sounded like a time of rest and quiet contemplation. She told him about her plans for the cottage. She wanted to learn how to grow her own food, to feel the soil in her hands, to eat things she had nurtured herself. The idea filled her with a simple, wholesome excitement. She was planning for a future in this place. She was putting down roots. As the sun began to lower in the sky, the light began to change. The pure, bright white of the snow began to take on a soft, rosy glow from the setting sun. The sky to the west was a beautiful, pale wash of pink and orange. It was a different kind of light from the golden light of autumn, but it was just as beautiful. It was a quieter, more gentle light. A winter light. They found themselves back at her cottage. The walk was over. A thin plume of smoke was rising from her chimney, a welcoming sign. The small windows glowed with a warm orange light from the lamp she had left burning. "I have a fire going," she said, "and I made soup." "That sounds good," he said, his smile reaching his eyes. They went inside, shaking the snow from their boots at the door. The cottage was warm and cozy. A pot of vegetable soup was simmering on the old stove, filling the room with a delicious, savory smell. The fire in the hearth crackled and danced, casting a warm, flickering light on the stone walls and the old wooden furniture. It was the picture of home. They ate their soup at the small wooden table, sitting close together in the warm glow of the firelight. They talked and laughed, their voices low and comfortable in the small, warm room. Outside, the world was dark and cold and covered in snow, but inside they were safe and warm. After they had eaten, they sat in the two armchairs in front of the fire, a comfortable silence settling between them again. Anna looked around the room at this small, simple space that had become her whole world. She had found a home. She had found a purpose. She had found a strength in herself she never knew she possessed. And she had found love. A quiet, steady, and deeply rooted love, as strong and as patient as the ancient trees in the forest. She looked at Eamon. He was watching the flames, his face calm and peaceful in the firelight. He looked like he belonged here, in this chair, in this cottage, by this fire. He turned his head and looked at her, and his gentle smile told her that he was thinking the same thing. Her journey to Oakhaven had started as a walk into the fading light of autumn, a search for something she felt she had lost, but it had become something else entirely. It had become a journey into the first light of winter, a journey into a new beginning. Her walk was no longer a lonely one. She was walking a common path now, with Eamon by her side, and she knew, with a quiet certainty that filled her heart, that this path would lead them through all the seasons yet to come, together, in the peaceful, enduring light of the valley. And then Eamon did something that surprised Anna. He stood up too. He did not say anything. He opened his small box of paintings and held up the first one. He just held it there for everyone to see. Arthur began to speak. His voice was not loud or angry. It was quiet. He talked about the valley. "My father was born in this valley," he began, his quiet voice filling the silent room, "and his father before him. I was born in the house my grandfather built with his own hands. I have lived my whole life here. When I was a boy, I used to play under that old oak tree." He gestured towards Eamon's painting. "My friends and I, we carved our names into its bark. My name is still there, though it's faint now." He paused and looked around at the faces of his neighbors. "We are not against progress," he said. "We know the world changes, but some things should be protected. This valley, it has a spirit, a soul. You can't see it in a picture on a screen. You can't put a price on it. You can only feel it when you are here, when you are quiet enough to listen. It's in the way the light falls in the afternoon. It's in the sound of the wind in the pines. It's in the memories that are held in these old stones." His words were simple, but they were true. Anna saw heads nodding. She saw tears welling up in Clara's eyes. Arthur was giving them a voice. He was speaking their truth. Then Eamon held up another painting. It was the painting of the deer trail leading into the woods. "That trail," Arthur said, his voice growing stronger. "Where will they go when their road is a paved street with cars on it?" One by one, Eamon held up his paintings. A painting of the rare ferns, a painting of the little stream, a painting of the robin with the bright red breast. And with each painting, Arthur told a small story. A story about the place, about its meaning, about its life. He was not making an argument. He was bearing witness. He was painting a picture with his words, a picture that was far more real and powerful than the slick computer images on the screen. The atmosphere in the room began to change. The villagers were sitting up straighter. They were looking at Arthur and Eamon with a dawning sense of pride. This was their valley. These were their stories. They were not powerless. They had a voice. And Arthur was speaking for all of them. When Arthur finished, he sat down. A profound silence returned to the room, but it was a different kind of silence now. The man with the silver hair cleared his throat, trying to regain control. That's very moving," he said, his voice sounding hollow and false. "We appreciate your perspective, but the fact remains, this project will bring jobs and prosperity to Oakhaven. We have conducted all the necessary environmental impact studies. The land has been designated as suitable for development. There are no legal obstacles." He had brought the conversation back to the law, and that was Anna's cue. She felt a surge of adrenaline, a cold, clear focus. This was her moment. She stood up. Her legs were shaking, but she stood tall. All eyes in the room turned to her, the outsider. "The woman from the city, you're wrong," she said, and her voice was clear and steady. It carried across the room. "There is a legal obstacle, a very significant one." She walked to the front of the room, her notebook in her hand. She stood beside Eamon, who gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. "And I have also been doing some research, not just into the spirit of this place, but into its documented history." She opened her notebook. "You said you conducted an environmental impact study, but I'm guessing your study was done in the autumn, when most of the flowers are no longer in bloom. Am I right?" "I'm sure they were," Anna said. She held up the thin, faded report. In this report, he documents the existence of a particular species of wild orchid growing in the field you plan to build on. She flipped to the page she had marked. He calls it by its Latin name, and he notes that it is exceedingly rare. She looked up at the company men. Their confident smiles were completely gone now. They were looking at her with a mixture of shock and disbelief. "Now, I'm not a lawyer," Anna continued, her confidence growing with every word. "But I have spent the last week reading up on national and regional environmental protection laws. Basically, the entire area of your proposed development." A low murmur went through the room. The villagers were staring at Anna, their mouths open in amazement. Arthur looked like he was going to cry, but this time, from joy. "But that's impossible," one of the other company men stammered. "An old report from the 30s. It's probably not even there anymore." He had found it pressed between the pages of one of his grandmother's old books, a perfect specimen, preserved for decades. He held it out on the palm of his hand. It was a tiny, fragile thing, but in that moment, it was more powerful than all the company's money and all their slick presentations. "And even if you wanted to argue that it's gone," Anna said, pressing her advantage, "the law is very clear. The mere historical presence of a protected species on a piece of land triggers a whole new level of mandatory multi-season surveys. It would take at least a year, and it would have to be done by independent government ecologists. Your project would be halted immediately, pending the results of that survey. And if they find even one of these little flowers, your project is dead. You will never get a permit to build here." She closed her notebook. "So you see," she said, her voice dropping to a quiet, firm conclusion, "you do have a legal obstacle. A very small, very beautiful, and very powerful one." The silence that followed was absolute. The company men were speechless. They looked at each other, their faces pale with shock and anger. They had been so sure of themselves, so certain of their victory, and they had been defeated. Not by a team of expensive lawyers, but by a quiet old storekeeper, a shy artist, and an outsider woman with an old book. The man with the silver hair stared at Anna, his face a mask of fury. He knew she was right. He knew they had been beaten. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. He just shook his head, gathered his papers, and without another word, he and his team turned and walked out of the village hall. The door slammed shut behind them, the sound echoing in the stunned silence. And then a single person started to clap. It was Clara, the baker. Then Arthur joined in, and then the whole room erupted. The villagers were on their feet, clapping, cheering, laughing. They were surrounding Arthur and Eamon and Anna, patting them on the back, shaking their hands, their faces shining with relief and a fierce, newfound pride. They were no longer a group of defeated people. They were a community. They had found their voice, and they had won. In the midst of the celebration, Anna looked at Eamon. He was smiling, a real wide smile that transformed his whole face. It was the first time she had ever seen him truly smile. He looked at her, his green eyes full of a light she had never seen before. He did not need to say anything. His eyes said it all. "Thank you. We did it." The villagers had found their voice, and Anna, the woman who had come to the valley feeling like a ghost, had found hers too. She had spoken up, and she had been heard. She had fought for something she believed in, and she had won. Standing there in the warm, noisy, happy chaos of the village hall, she felt more real, more alive than she had ever felt in her entire life. Chapter 6. The First Winter Light. The victory in the village hall did not bring a loud, triumphant celebration. Instead, a deep, quiet peace settled over Oakhaven. It was the peace of a storm that has passed, leaving the air clean and still. The ugly pink ribbon stakes in the golden field disappeared as quietly as they had arrived. One morning, they were simply gone. The land could breathe again. There was a new sense of pride in their quiet conversations, a new strength in the way they walked. They had faced a great threat together, and they had survived. They had learned that their small, quiet valley had a powerful voice. For Anna, the days after the meeting were a time of gentle unfolding. The fierce, focused energy that had driven her for weeks began to soften. The protective fire in her chest did not go out, but it settled into a warm, steady glow, like the embers of a long-burning fire. She had come to Oakhaven with a simple, practical plan. Fix the cottage, sell it, and leave. The plan now seemed like a distant memory, a story about a person she no longer was. The thought of leaving, of returning to the city, was no longer just a painful idea. It was an impossible one. How could she leave the place that had saved her? How could she leave the people who had become her people? How could she leave Eamon? The work on her great-uncle's cottage was finished. The stone wall in the garden was strong and whole. The windows were clean and secure, no longer letting in the winter drafts. The inside was warm and comfortable. The dust of years of neglect had been replaced by the comforting scent of wood smoke, old books, and drying herbs. She had arranged the simple furniture in a way that felt right to her. She had even brought some of her own things from her city apartment, which she had finally, definitively, decided to sell. She had called a real estate agent, her voice firm and certain. She had told them to sell the apartment and everything in it. All she wanted were her books and a few personal photographs. She was cutting the last ties to her old life, not with sadness, but with a feeling of liberation. Her cottage no longer felt like a temporary stop, a project to be completed. It felt like a home, her home. The fire in the stone hearth was her fire. The books on the shelves, her own volumes now sitting comfortably next to her great-uncle's old field guides, were her library. She was no longer an intruder in someone else's memories. She was building her own. Autumn, with its fiery colors and golden light, finally gave way to winter. The change was gradual, gentle. The last of the brown leaves fell from the trees, leaving their bare branches like intricate black lace against the pale sky. The air grew colder, sharper. One morning, Anna woke up to a world transformed. A soft, silent snow had fallen during the night. It was not a heavy, dramatic blizzard. It was a gentle, thoughtful snow, the kind that hushes the world. It covered everything in a thick, clean blanket of white. The golden field was now a vast, smooth expanse of snow. The dark forest was edged with white. The roofs of the village cottages were piled high with it. The valley was silent, wrapped in a fresh, profound quiet. Anna stood at her newly glazed window, a cup of hot tea warming her hands, and looked out at the white world. The beauty of it filled her with a deep, peaceful joy. It was the first snow of her new life. It felt like a clean page, a fresh start. The turmoil of the past few weeks felt far away. The threat from the development company had been a fever, and now the fever had broken, leaving the valley calm and rested. She pulled on her warmest boots, her thickest coat, and her hat and gloves. She had to walk in it. She had to feel the crunch of the new snow under her feet. The snow absorbed all sound, making the quiet even deeper. The only sound was the soft puff of her own breath in the air. She walked onto her path, the path that had become so central to her life. It was a different path now, a white track through a white world. She followed it along the edge of the field. The giant's boulder was wearing a thick cap of snow, like a funny white hat. The trees at the forest's edge were draped in it, every tiny twig outlined in white. The world had been simplified, reduced to its essential shapes. She was not walking alone for long. They met on the path in the middle of the silent, snowy field. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice soft in the quiet air. "It always is, the first snow," he replied. "It makes the valley new again." They fell into step, walking together, their boots making a satisfying crunching sound in the fresh snow. They did not need to talk much. They were comfortable in the shared silence, a silence that was no longer awkward or empty, but full and rich with everything they had been through together. They had fought a battle together, and the bond that had formed between them was strong and deep. The unspoken understanding that had sparked between them on that high mountain ridge had settled into a quiet, certain reality. It was a feeling that was as natural and as solid as the ground beneath their feet. They walked for a long time, their path a single set of tracks in the pristine snow. They walked past the place where the rare orchids grew, now sleeping soundly under their white blanket, safe and protected. They walked past the ancient oak tree, which looked even more majestic and wise with its branches outlined in snow. The valley felt like their own private world, a peaceful kingdom of white and gray, and the dark green of the pines.